morning, good morning, good morning. Resilient ones with a lot of fortitude, making it to our last day of Ignite. Super happy to welcome you to this session where we'll talk quite a bit about engaging partner engagement for digital sovereignty in the cloud. My name is Valecia Maclin-Topping. I am the General Manager for Public Sector Cloud Solutions within our Cloud and AI business. Joining me on the stage is Robert Badawy, who is our product leader for all of the feature development for our Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty and Regulated Environment Management Solutions. Hopefully you've been able to take advantage of a couple of the sessions we've already had on sovereignty here at Ignite this week. We had a demo in Theater C where you got to see how to deploy sovereign cloud solutions. And then we also had a breakout session that Robert led yesterday going into the details of our Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty solution, which is our software-based cloud solutions for sensitive workloads with government. And today we're going to talk about partner engagement strategies for unlocking the adoption of the public cloud for sensitive workloads. So again, we'll introduce Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty again for those of you who may not have had an opportunity to either participate in those sessions or see our booth in Zone 2. We'll do a light touch on that today because we want to then get into the partner use cases and engagement strategy for taking advantage of the opportunities that this new set of capabilities provides for you. This is an interactive session, which hopefully will serve you well on this last day. So as we're going through, think about what questions you may have, because we're going to spend a lot of time with some give and take in terms of questions, engaging solutions. And as much as we want you to learn from us, we also want to learn from you what challenges there may be so that we can help enhance that as we both develop our roadmap and as we're engaging with you, with customers. So Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty is a solution for public sector and heavily regulated industries to be able to design, build, deploy, and transform digital workloads onto the hyperscale cloud while meeting compliance and regulatory and security and policy requirements. For myself, I spent nearly 30 years prior to coming to Microsoft in heavily regulated public sector information solutions, primarily around national security. And so we know that those environments tend to have very heavy compliance requirements, a lot of security requirements, privacy, and other regulations that have to be adhered to that vary by countries. Also in this particular solution set, we support FSI, healthcare, so think heavily regulated industries, and how do we make it easy to adopt the hyperscale cloud? So here's what we hear from our customers in this space. Data residency within region boundaries where you can access and control your data. We hear a need for operational sovereignty where systems and personnel and processes are uninterrupted despite geopolitical events that may occur, where there's operator transparency, and it came up in the session we had yesterday, so I'll put it out there already. As political climates change, we know we have the US Cloud Act, and there's often sensitivity about what a US-based company will expose with respect to data. We are very sensitive to that, and we'll share what our policies and practices, which are public, are around operator transparency in terms of confidently knowing who accesses your data and source code for customers and for countries. And then looking to take advantage of the hyperscale cloud, right? So for many years, as we have a little bit of ringing, for many years, right, that it was felt that you could only do that fully instance or on-prem solution for sensitive workloads. What we've unlocked here is probably about 70 to 80% of those workloads can move to the hyperscale cloud, which gives the greater cybersecurity resiliency, which gives access to AI and other higher order solutions. So we'll talk a bit about that. Now, the challenges with moving to the hyperscale cloud, and it varies greatly by governments, by agencies within governments. I have a lot of conversations with them. I'm sure many of you do as well. But it's a complicated legislative and regulatory landscape. And a lot of times it is driven not by the truth of the technology, but it could be the perceptions. And helping to allay those fears in a way that you can still demonstrate data residency, operator transparency, and that you're compliant with the regulatory environment can be complex, and it can change based on who's in parliament at that time or who's in office. Concerns about protecting and securing data. You heard me talk very briefly about seeing a resurrection of concerns about the Cloud Act, which we'll talk about. And then also uncertainty about how do you ensure digital sovereignty. And so these are the challenges that we hear, and we hope as we go through the discussion today, we can help clarify how you can target that message of how our solution actually clarifies that. So one of the benefits in terms of what we're seeing in terms of acceleration is we're seeing AI be a catalyst for pushing towards adoption of the hyperscale cloud because you need to migrate those workloads to the cloud in order to take advantage of what we're seeing now with copilots and agents today. Regulations are adapting, so we're seeing more and more governments put laws and policies in place that position them to embrace the public cloud and the architectures for which it provides. And we do have some case studies that we can share with you from Italy, from Netherlands, and a few other places where they're already adopting the hyperscale cloud and migrating these workloads, leveraging Microsoft Cloud for sovereignty. And then also the cloud provides a greater security around confidentiality. So the innovation, being able to quickly adapt to the changing regulatory climate, and then security are three key drivers that we're seeing cause governments and agencies within governments be willing, and public sector, not just governments, but across public sector, being able to embrace the hyperscale cloud. The cloud spectrum, as Microsoft, we do offer a full spectrum of cloud offerings in a sovereign way. What we're going to be talking about today is around our commercial hyperscale offering, which this allows strong encryption in transit. You may have heard a session this week on our Azure Confidential Compute. The flexibility to adapt to unique needs of the government, as well as great experience in getting this adapted for complex compliance and regulatory environments. So software-defined sovereignty, what is guiding our work? Customers control who can access their own data. So that's not something we're controlling, that's something that our customers are controlling and that your customers will be able to control. The data is managed in accordance with local laws and regulations of the jurisdiction in which it is located. That includes data residency when required, and how we handle cloud operators is transparent, right? So we do provide transparency logs so that if any time, for some reason, as the cloud service provider where Microsoft would have to access the data, that is fully visible. Now, what I will also say is we have public statements around our operator transparency and our responsibility with your data. I can say one of my roles in Microsoft prior to taking on this product team was being responsible for seeing when any requests came in for access to data. And I can assure you, and we have public statements from our president that Microsoft takes very, very seriously that customers own their own data, that access is controlled by laws, and that it is actually a very rare instance when that request comes forward to the company. So I'm going to build up this chart. This we call our wedding cake chart, affectionately. And so it just kind of gives you the hierarchy of what our sovereign solution, and notice I'm saying solution because it is a set of product capabilities, is built on top of. So the bottom layer of the cake is that this is built on our hyperscale cloud solutions. Today is built around Azure. We do, and this is as of GA of December of 2023. This past April, we did release guidelines for M365 and the Dynamics suite. But the key here is all of the resiliency and security that we have around our public cloud all of the trillions of signals that we see per day from a cybersecurity perspective, all of the compliance is there in the public cloud that you would see with Azure and which you would be able to deploy with Azure. On top of that, we build additional policy packs, and you have your operator transparency logs that can give the confidence and transparency around operator access. And then on that next layer of this cake, we define sovereign guardrails for when you're deploying your landing zones. It gives you a way to deploy the public cloud in a way that takes into account this regulatory landscape. And then on top of that, we do additional sovereign controls that, again, can be defined based on local jurisdictions. What we'll do now, and I know I went through that very quickly, but it's because we do want to have time for your discussion with you. And so what we're going to talk about now, which is really a focus of this session, which we found highly successful at last year's Ignite as well, is to talk about how, as partners, you can engage with customers to adopt Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty, share some best practices and lessons learned, and then also hear from you in terms of what some of those struggles may be or opportunities may be. And then we also have some use cases that we can share with you as well. So at this time, I'm going to hand over to Robert to walk through our engagement strategies.
Thank you, Valecia. And for those who did not come yesterday, apologies. This introduction was short, just to leave time for the partner opportunities. The session yesterday that goes more into details of Cloud for Sovereignty is recorded. You can go and watch it on the Ignite website. So let's talk about the opportunities of how we can work together. In a nutshell, a lot of what Cloud for Sovereignty does, we mentioned over and over again, it is on the public cloud. Everything in Azure you have access to, AI services, data, analytics, cybersecurity, and et cetera. What it adds on top of it when you talk of sovereign guardrails, think of a pre-configured environment that is repeatable to deploy and compliant by design. So what this is doing, it's really simplifying and lowering your barrier to entry. And because it's on the public cloud, as a partner, you can take advantage of every single Azure region that exists out there. So by taking either the pre-configured landing zones that we have, you can extend them, localize them, and they become your own IP, and you can share them with your customers. You could also, I spoke yesterday a lot about our policy portfolio. Our policy portfolio is a collection of Azure policy that actually are designed in a way, are built in a way to be mapped to an actual regulation. We have some per country, we have some per industry. For example, one of the first ones we released is the BO policy for the Netherlands. We have released one for Spain, Italy, we're working with Korea. In addition to the ones that were out as soon as we went GA, we have a sovereignty baseline policy, which is a policy set that makes sure your data stays resident, it adopts confidential computing, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it is a set of policy that is ready, that help you be compliant, and a pre-configured environment in the form of landing zones that are really, really simplifying how easy for you as partners is to enter new markets. That's the case. They're configurable and customizable, so you can also localize them to your customer's need, to your industry's needs, or to your country's need. Second opportunity for you is, and we've seen this, for example, and we're going to talk about Leonardo a little bit in Italy. Italy, we have a partner. Leonardo is our partner. And they became like a national sovereign cloud for Italy running on the public scale. So when partners have this trust relationship with the public sector there, they build their IP on top of Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty and become a national cloud provider on top of the public cloud, compliant with laws and regulations of the country and the industry they're selling to. So there are huge co-sell opportunities in the space. And third is, if you want to provide managed services, we had a theater session yesterday on the regulated environment management service. It's a new Azure service. It's in preview today. It will become public first quarter will become in public preview first quarter of next year. It does all of this that we mentioned through a simple, easy-to-use Azure portal experience, which means it's also backed by APIs. So you can use Azure SDK, Azure CLI, Azure API to create landing zones, create policy, apply policy, create these pre-configured environments that are sovereign by design, and distribute them to your customers, deploy them, and integrate those with any managed service you have. So by this, API integration is a huge, I think will be a huge tool and service for our partners, because we know a lot of you have potentially already existing IP, existing managed services that you can integrate with. So these are the three main things I wanted to talk about. And some of you probably have a lot of questions. We're going to leave a lot of room for questions. But I believe this is the value proposition for partners, and we have several use cases that are already taking advantage of it. What we also would like is, what we expect is partners, if they want to be in the space with us, to assign resources, to engage with customers, bring customers to the space, help us. And as well, we rely, in a lot of cases, on partners to provide insights into the local regulations and the local markets. Actually, as a matter of fact, some of the policies we have built for countries are not Microsoft built. We work with the partner. We co-build them with the partner. And the partner will end up owning this intellectual property. So we really think partners provide incredible insight for us to debate, especially in the space of local regulations and compliance requirements. And last, we can work together to define, and we expect you to help as well define your go-to-market strategy when it comes to how we want to sell and Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty. Here's the chart that we use internally, and I thought it's good that I share how we basically qualify opportunities. We first is the customer. We look at the customer. Are they committed to digital transformation? Are they committed and they have basically a desire to adopt the hyperscale cloud? Next level, yes. If they are, is cloud adoption blocked by regulations? Is it too complicated for them to understand if they can be in the cloud, if they're going to be compliant, or, for example, by US concerns or US legal concerns? If that's the case, and if this is yes, can Cloud for Sovereignty features address that requirement? When all of these are true, this is basically the best opportunity for you to engage with the customer. So again, they're committed to go to the hyperscale cloud because they probably want AI. They are hindered or blocked by regulations. It's either a perception or they find it too complicated for them to be compliant in the hyperscale cloud. And third is going through the Cloud for Sovereignty features. Does it actually help them out? And these typically are the customers that provide, that are the best opportunity. Of course, yeah.
Something that we've observed probably over the past 9 months is that there have been some jurisdictions, some countries that were adamant couldn't do hyperscale cloud, can't do hyperscale cloud, I need it all here. Mm-hmm. And as they've been able to learn what we can actually cover in terms of sovereign controls and guardrails with this software-based solution, we're seeing an openness to actually, oh, wait, so I can consider it, right? So there are those instances where it's no, we can't do cloud, and sometimes that's a political knee-jerk reaction. But we have seen over the past 9 months or so where that can shift, when folks are looking at, I need to have some resiliency, I need to have disaster recovery, I need to think about continuity of operations in situations where there may be local threats that could impact my data center. So that's where this partnership that Robert has mentioned, that when we can actually have that conversation, okay, what does sovereignty really mean to you? What are the fears with going to the cloud? And hey, if you're really concerned about the resiliency of your operations, if you're really concerned about cybersecurity and compliance to your regulations, there is this opportunity to leverage a set of capabilities, which are free, by the way, right? There's not a separate SKU for this. If you have Azure, you have access to Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty. So we have seen this shift where the no, I don't want to move to the cloud, or no, I don't think this will work unless I have something, that is controlled physically that I can see. As we continue these conversations, we're seeing that loosen up.
And I would like to add this shift. I mean, there were several sessions on it at Ignite this week. This shift is backed by technology to change the perception. I don't know if you have seen any of the Azure Confidential Computing sessions that happened this week. Azure Confidential Computing encrypts data even while it's in memory. So you are basically preventing even Microsoft operator to access the data at any time. So we know that data usually is, it becomes standard that data is encrypted at rest and in transit. What Azure Confidential Computing add, it also encrypts it while in use. And it's a hardware-based encryption, so Microsoft is out of the loop. Microsoft operators are out of the loop and cannot access its data. So that shift is truly backed by technology. Add Cloud for Sovereignty tools on top of it, which simplifies the compliance and regulatory aspect, and not just that, the architectural aspect of it. So you have pre-configured architectures that are compliant by design and repeatable, that can also simplify the adoption of Azure Confidential Computing because the policies are within this pre-configured architecture, and the transparency services that we provide as well. So a lot of this shift we are seeing is truly backed by hard controls, hard technology that Microsoft provides, and the simplification that Cloud for Sovereignty is giving you as well. Okay. I'm going to go through several use cases of partners we have collaborated with. And I would like to leave at least 20 minutes for questions, so let's roll here. Leonardo is our partner in Italy. They've been very successful. We work with them very closely. They are one of the first national partners of Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty, and they are truly bringing the public sector there to adopt the hyperscale cloud using Microsoft services and Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty tools as well. We have a collaboration with G42 in the United Arab Emirates as well. It is a similar type of collaboration that we have with Leonardo. A lot of it is based on AI and their AI business and how they can basically enable AI for their partners, especially public sector there. And this one is more recent. We have signed a collaboration with Korea Telecom, and they will follow a model similar to what Leonardo is doing in Italy, where they'll provide a national sovereign, double quote, cloud on the hyperscale Microsoft cloud for the Korean regulated industry as well. Another example is our partner Proximus in Belgium and Luxembourg, also extending and localizing Cloud for Sovereignty tools for their market. And last but not least, I am showing an example of a live customer in this case, which is the city of Amsterdam. The Netherlands have been one of our earlier adopters of Cloud for Sovereignty. And the city of Amsterdam have an AI-based application running in Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty today.
And so these are just a couple of examples. So you see a combination of national level SIs that are transforming a very broad swath of government engagement and solutions for the acceleration of citizen services with AI adoption. There's also the a regional partner like a Proximus. We have some healthcare solutions in Switzerland where it is a smaller partner that is doing a particular segment of public sector. And then we also have a number, so as we started this journey, it is available in GitHub. We have a large contingent of organic adoption, I would describe it as, Robert. You get to look at the telemetry a lot closer as our product leader. So there's a lot of organic evolution as well because the policy packs are out there.
Absolutely.
The sovereign controls are out there. So you have a number of partners that will just pick up the capability and leverage it for a localized deployment strategy of working with customers to adopt the public cloud. So we see a spectrum of engagement. That's all that we have in terms of charts because we really, really want this session to be interactive so that we can know as you look at what you hear with this capability and you think about customers that you may engage in the public sector, what are some challenges? Are there other areas we can help with respect to that adoption? We work very, very closely with our field teams around the world, and that's why you saw that dispersion of, from the Middle East to Korea to Europe. There is the understanding and recognition of things like DORA and all of those regulations that we've anticipated with this software-based sovereign solution, right, versus the brick and mortar for an isolated solution. And so would love to hear from you in terms of the ability to leverage this capability for your customer engagements.
And especially, like you mentioned, Valecia, as soon as we have a policy set released for a particular industry or a country, we see organic adoption immediately. So it's really giving us signals that, regulations, in addition to a lot of other fears, regulations have been an issue. And when you simplify this aspect, it's leading to, yes, a lot of organic adoptions as well. Yeah.
So, again, would love to open it up for questions. We have a mic up front.
Microphone is here for any questions you want to ask.
Yeah.
They should have maybe a closer microphone.
Yeah.
I'll ask one question. As geo evolves in terms of regulations and economic situations, how adaptable are these controls that you have in terms of software to be able to adapt to changing needs geopolitically, et cetera?
Right. Well, and actually, it's that climate that's driving. Now, I'll start off and hand it over to Robert. Right, it is that changing climate that's driving the interest. Right, because there is that ability to define, the policy packs by country. And to Robert's point, once that definition is there, then it's taking off. Now, where we need that help is, it's really with regional partners to help understand what those needs are. And then Robert, I'll let him talk to how we get those policy packs defined, or that could be a window of opportunity for partners, right? So that becomes a market opportunity for partners, is defining those localized policy packs that then can drive a go-to-market strategy within that region.
They're in the form of the actual physical artifact is an Azure policy, is a set of Azure policies. So we maintain them, and if regulations change, we have a new version of it, and you can go and apply it to your environment by upgrading the version from one to the other. That's how we're doing it. I think the gentleman had a question too.
Yes, when I'm in front of a microphone, I always want to sing, but
go ahead.
We might use that right now.
You have 60
Keep everyone awake,
minutes.
I have a more broader question, because you're a US company, and I'm from Europe, and right now the relationship is okay. But what happens if that changes? Because we see all those things. I really like what I see, but that's adaptable when everything is getting worse for that. So how do you look at that?
Yeah, wonderful question. And actually, we have very public statements on how we protect our customers' data, right? So those statements are out there, but here's what I will say. And again, I worked in that area in terms of our corporate, external, and legal affairs organization with the president of how we manage that data. Our customers will always own their own data. And yes, there is the US Cloud Act, but I can also tell you that we get more, in terms of, requests for access to data from those jurisdictions than we get from the US. It is a minuscule amount, right? And, when you think about the volume of data that's secured in the cloud. So what I will say is that we will always protect customers' data. We always adhere to the local jurisdictional laws of the region, right? And again, I could quote exact numbers, right? But the requests that come in globally, the lion's share of them are actually from the jurisdiction from where that country is. And still, we have very, very tight controls that we make public, even for those jurisdictions, of what it takes before customer data would get released. And it's very stringent. And again, those policies are public, those statements are public, and it is backed by real metrics and data. We're going to protect customers' data. Your data is your own. And then when you couple that with what Robert just said in terms of where we're going with our technology, Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty embodies a capability around confidential compute, where we can't see it anyway, right? So so we are going to confidential computing writ large. I believe Scott Guthrie, we call him Scott Goo internally, and Satya made statements of that during Ignite. And so what we're doing, hardware and with software, is we're not in that loop, right? So those are the types of assurances that can be provided. Does it get rid of the fear? No, right? And at times, and that's where that partner engagement is super valuable. And I was in Europe.
I can add one. I can also add one more thing here. If you're concerned about autarky, I think that's what's like. If at some point it gets so bad that the cables are cut, like that's the extreme, right?
That's the thing. It's not only about the data, but also about
absolutely.
the service.
I could tell from your question you're also talking about cutting the cables. Of course, that's why when Valecia started, we are targeting 80% of government load on a public sector. Right. We do understand there is defense, intelligence. There are things that may need to stay on premise because you want them to run even if the electricity is off and all the cables are cut. Right. But for this very, very small risk of a major geopolitical event between allies, small risk, you want to let the other 80% of workloads not be in the cloud and adopt Azure, AI, and all the benefits of the cloud because of a very, very small risk of the need for autarky. So we're seeing more and more than the requirements to basically keep running even when the cables are cut, only affect a very small amount of data.
Of the workload.
Of the workloads, of the data.
Workloads within a region.
As a partner, I would go after data that is not classified secret or top secret. I would go for data that is more classified as sensitive. And this is where partners have been the most successful in this. There are solutions that enable what you're saying. Like, for example, we have Azure Local. We don't talk about it as much, which allows you to run Azure on the edge, disconnected. Even the control plane is on the edge. So that's why when Valecia started, it was like, we're not going to focus on these today.
Right.
But there are solutions that handle this use case. But I believe the risk we are talking about here only concerns a smaller number of data.
Which allow,
or workloads.
And to that point, we cover the spectrum. So you have Azure Local for those edge solutions that you need to protect. And then what we talk about in this space is some of those other public sector workloads that you can then still take advantage of. And again, in the conversation as it's evolved, we've seen two dynamics that are happening. We've had early adopter countries. I was in Amsterdam a couple weeks ago. I'll be in Italy and UK in another couple weeks. We've seen those that adopted early and were able to kind of navigate the waters of helping regulators understand what we were talking about, that pendulum shift so they could go fast, but now it's kind of the tell me again why this is okay, right? Because of the climate that's happening. And then we're seeing that other dynamic of, oh, I don't want to risk if the wires are cut, everything in government is shut down, right? And so what is that percentage that I can now start to, migrate to the cloud without the heavy expense and resource constraints that can be driven because of the assurances we've been able to give. So we are seeing those two extremes with our partners that we're engaging with. And again, this sort of dialogue helps us to tune, okay, are we back at explaining why the cloud again? Or, are we navigating to, because of the dynamics of the geopolitical climate and the relationship continuity, right? So you could say it's a small risk, but if you're living it every day, it's not perceived as a small risk, right? How do we actually demonstrate, and we do have the capability to demonstrate that you're actually safer. And we have both the data and the technology to back those things up.
Is there something to put that in simple words? So, because when I'm at work, I understand it, but the question I ask is not because I don't understand it, but I try to find a way to tell the people
who have those. So you were in the room with us in Europe about a month ago, right? And that is something, actually, in 2 weeks, I'll be meeting with a gentleman who runs EMEA for us, and that's partnering with me in this space and what we're doing with cyber. And that's something we're talking about, is what can we do to help the explanation be easier so that it's repeatable. And and then as it's repeatable, it kind of locks in, right? It's like hearing commercials all the time, or the song. I don't know what song you're going to sing. It's like hearing a song that you didn't like at first, but then it keeps playing and you're okay, right?
Don't stop me now.
The simple message. Can I ask you what country you're from in Europe?
Netherlands.
Oh, Netherlands.
Okay.
The simple message is going to be different by country and by region. That's why you're not going to see it on the internet. So we can definitely work together to simplify the message or these fears. Per region, because
I can reach out to you.
Yeah, and
yes,
you can. And in fact, the gentleman I'm meeting with is in the Netherlands, right? And that's where he's based, and that's one of the first spaces that, because of conversations we've had with our customers there that are direct customers and through our partners, that's one of the first places we want to help clarify the language.
Feel free to reach out, and I will navigate you through Microsoft as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was
the problem
question.
If I ask another question? Go ahead. Because the third thing is the resourcing. When COVID was there, the US was prioritized over other places. How will that work in the future?
So let me make sure I understand your question. Your question is, during the pandemic, resources, talking technology.
Everybody started using Teams.
Right. And so that's where you heard me mention the first layering of our Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty solution was based around Azure. We released guidance in April, which I'll let Robert talk a little bit more about in terms of M365, and then things that we're about to start with Dynamics as well. And there, in terms of continuing that sovereign journey for M365, there's a roadmap there as well, and I'll let Robert speak a little bit to that.
I'm not sure though I understood your question. During COVID, we actually added resources all over the world.
But the story was in Europe that it wasn't working well over there sometimes because a lot of people used it together. But in the US, they were prioritized so that it would work there better.
I don't know if there's true evidence for this. Because I'll give you an example, my day-to-day work, right? Half our team is not in the US. We will be shooting ourselves in the foot as a company if we prioritize, US. Literally half, actually more than half.
Yes.
It's such a global company. It's in our best interest that our cloud works across the planet. So I don't know if there's true evidence for the fact that there's any priority over the US over the other.
And in fact, with this solution here, half of my team is in Europe. The other half is
our main market for this solution is Europe, Middle East, and Asia right now. However, the reason we are at Ignite in the US as well is because we're seeing also a lot of American public sector who are in our GCC cloud, which is a disconnected cloud, who want to be in the hyperscale, and they just didn't realize that they could be, for example, FedRAMP compliant in the hyperscale cloud, and they're moving also to the hyperscale cloud as well.
But even that's new. Most of the adoption that we targeted was for outside the US.
Yes, we started outside the US, and it's our main market.
So it was a fake story. In the Netherlands, we call it _𝗀𝗲𝗄.
That's my guess. It was a fake story because yes, if Teams works better in the US than in Europe, I can't talk to my colleagues.
Okay.
Thank you for your questions, though. Thank you so much. Other questions? Sir?
Hello.
I'm from Armenia, and I've got two questions. One is related to countries where there is no data center. So we're taking examples from EU. There are data centers in EU,
Right.
but when it comes down to countries that don't have a data center and most probably will never have a public data center because they're too small,
Right.
what is your experience with that? Because what we see, something that is happening is those countries define a sister region, like a friendly region where they're okay to store their data. Like for Armenia, it could be, for example, EU as a region. But then you come to the point where you have two set of regulations. One
for
where the
where it
data
is,
center is located,
for
and one the
yours.
regulations of your countries.
I think the regulations are typically going to be not for where, like for example, I don't know about the regulation of Armenia, but I'm going to take a guess. So do you have any regulations that are very explicit in Armenia of how to go to the cloud, or do you rely on guidance?
At this point, they're working on that, and
Okay.
they're planning of adding a sister regulator region,
So-
saying EU as a
you would-
region that we trust.
Yes.
But then on the practical sense, do you end up having to
What has been working is, by the way, in a lot of cases, for example, sometimes you don't want the data to be always in your country because in case of war, you
Yeah,
need the data
like
somewhere
Ukraine,
else,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
Ukraine, right? So that's a different conversation. But what I would recommend is to go take a look at confidential computing and what's happening in this space. Because yes, you have to pick a country that you think friendly and you can use that data center. In addition, when you add the confidential computing story to it, because especially that you're not under strict regulations, that's why I asked this question. If there is no law that tells you the data has to be on Armenian soil, that's great, because that's really not a control, right?
barrier.
It's not a control, like it's just a perception. Confidential computing prevents anybody from accessing your data, right? So because the control, if a government is writing modern regulation, the rule should be the data should only be accessed by you. It should not be written in a way the data should sit on Armenian soil, because this is not a protection against data access, because we know the internet is connected, so wherever the data is sitting is not going to protect it from access.
But I think
Yeah.
you're also asking about the configuration control of multiple policies,
Yeah.
right? So you're going to have the policy and
yeah.
controls for where it's resident, and then you're at this evolving stage of
Of adding
developing
your
your
own,
own policies, and how do you track both of those? And so when the sovereign landing zone, which is what our solution set allows you to push out rather quickly and easily, and you heard
Yeah.
Robert talk about us transitioning to a portal experience. You can then select those policy packs as a part of the template for how you would deploy those landing zones for Armenia, right?
But
And,
are there any use cases, like similar cases?
in terms of multiple regional
that you have
policies.
a country?
I'm not a compliance expert, so I cannot tell you.
No, I meant
Yeah,
you
the
have
examples
cases
in the
where you
tip.
have a country who deploys through sovereign cloud
Yes.
to another jurisdiction.
Yes.
Maybe you.
Yes, there are. And what Valecia was referring to is because we're simplifying the process of compliance, you can basically add the policies you need. As a partner, you have a unique opportunity to actually have a competitive advantage. So if you use the Cloud for Sovereignty tools to take policy sets and extend them in a way
That work for
that works for you and works for Armenia, you give yourself a competitive advantage.
Okay.
So that's why policy development is not easy. It takes us actually most of the time is not the engineering, is to translate regulations into law. So we have seen partners being successful by taking this to be their business, as to say, I have an Azure policy pack that actually meets these requirements. It simplifies your adoption, and it will give you as a competitive advantage.
And what it would do is embed the EU policy and then what you would
Yeah.
define
Okay.
for Armenia,
Yeah.
right? So it would be a Armenia policy pack that includes
On top
that
of the
embedded-
other.
yeah,
On top of the EU.
exactly,
Thank you.
exactly.
We are one of the policy packs we're working on right now that'll be out soon is the EUCS regulation, which I think will help a lot of EU customers as well.
Okay. And one other small question. We never touched this before the Russian-Ukrainian war, but then we had like subsidiaries of Russian companies in Armenia, and we saw how sanctions work.
Right.
And in regards to you're saying that data is your own, like how does it differ from the way it works for the commercial customers in this case? Because what we see is, for example, there is a company and there's one sanction in, for example, UK, no sanctions in other locations, and everything is terminated and no access to data. Is there anything that is in the works, so at least there would be a guarantee that we will send you your data, we will give you access to get your data, we're not providing you services because of a sanction, but you can take your data?
I mean, you can always take your data.
No. When it's sanctioned, no. They terminate right away, no access to data, no access to
so
anything.
for this type of risk, actually partners can play. You can have, we're getting into solution architecture right now, but I'm going to try to entertain it here. You can architecture a solution that backs up in a different cloud every day. So if this one is disconnected, you use this one.
No, but I'm talking about the regulation part, not that you can technically resolve it.
Okay,
somehow.
and we're not the
Okay.
we're not the compliance attorneys, and so
Okay,
so that's a question. we have to
the
take
question was
back.
like,
Yeah.
is there anything in the works that at least that you heard of that at least there would
Let
be?
me
we can
understand
take
your
that
question,
back,
take this
yeah.
offline. I want to understand because
Okay.
what our goal here, like as engineers, is to
Yeah.
provide you the tools for you to be compliant, right? And Microsoft is a platform company, is not a compliance company or regulation
Right.
company. But I want to understand more what you have to
Yeah,
add. We
and
can
then
chat,
follow that
we can
up.
chat
All
outside
right.
Yeah,
if you like.
great question. Yeah. Another question?
We're out of
Oh,
time.
we're out of time. Oh gosh.
But maybe there's nobody waiting. Maybe we can take one more question.
Well, we have that next
Okay.
session.
All right.
But we'll take one more if there's a burning question. Yeah. So,
So how do you stand against Google and AWS?
How do we stack, you said?
No, how do you stand? So
Yes.
the sovereign cloud.
Some,
Why I'm asking?
yeah.
This sovereign cloud to me is first new universe and one of your partners. But it seems to me it's a kind of niche segment, but very captive. So if you go in, you are in, and it's great, right? If you stand it. So, and the decision on the partner side is not I'm cloud agnostic. I go with you. If I
Right.
go with you, I go with you.
Right.
And I go globally.
right.
So here's the question. This is big.
Yes, they have, all the major cloud providers have similar offering. They're not the same. So we've seen,
Well, they've taken different approaches to
Absolutely,
market as well,
absolutely.
right?
So some of
and
them
even
are-
how sovereignty is defined, right, is different, right? So if you say, I'm going to define sovereignty and it's data residency, it's just all right here, you can still say that's a sovereign cloud solution, but there are limitations and there's pros and there's cons, right? And so what we've done is taken a spectrum. So there are countries that, because of their laws and regulations, Germany, France, have a fully instance disconnected cloud. There are those regions where there's an edge solution, right? And that's what we do with Azure Arc. And then what we've introduced is this software-based sovereignty solution. I think if you would look at Google with GCDP, whatever it is, right?
GCP, yeah.
GCP,
Google Cloud Platform.
yeah, and then even Oracle does some things that they wrap the sovereign name around, but has some limitations. And then obviously, AWS has taken an approach that's closer to a fully instance, heavily resource approach. And so to Robert's point, all of us have taken our interpretation of the word sovereign in terms of how we're deploying our cloud capabilities. Our approach has been to give a spectrum that there's not a one size fits all, and think about the question that came from Armenia, right? There's some geographies that aren't, we're going to build a data center and have 6,000 people that have to be our citizens that's not going to work, right? So we looked at, okay, what's that spectrum of the market to where we can support this cloud migration and adoption so we can get these benefits that we hear customers say they want, recognizing that there are some geographic and resource limitations that aren't going to lean into hiring 6,000 people and taking 2 years and footprint and GPUs and that sort of thing.
the main difference would see us, even though we have the cloud spectrum, you'll see the message from Microsoft talks a lot more about the sovereignty also in the hyperscale cloud, while other vendors will focus more on the traditional definition of sovereignty that is disconnected.
Yeah.
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 Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of successes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, and as well as safe travels as you head back home.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.